For 6 years, my wife lay silent in a coma, until I noticed her clothes were changed every night. I pretended to leave on a trip, came back in secret, and saw the truth. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. For nearly 6 years, Kenneth Holloway lived the same day on repeat. The alarm went off at 5:30 every morning. He showered in 4 minutes, made instant coffee because the good stuff felt wasteful now, ate toast standing over the sink. Then he drove his rusted Honda Civic to the Cedar Falls Municipal Water Plant, where he monitored pressure gauges and filed reports that no one read until something went wrong. Work ended at 4. He stopped at Hy-Vee twice a week for the same groceries. Chicken breasts, rice, frozen vegetables, bread. The cashiers knew him by sight, but not by name. He never spoke beyond what was necessary. Dinner was always alone at the small kitchen table. He sat in the same chair he'd used for 15 years. Virginia's chair stayed empty across from him. Her placemat was still there, faded and curled at the edges. After dinner, he washed his plate and fork, dried them, put them away. Then he grabbed his jacket and keys and drove to St. Vincent Regional Hospital. The route never changed. 14th Street to College, College to Main, Main to the hospital parking lot, where his Civic always found the same spot under the broken light in row C. He walked through the automatic doors at 6:45 every evening. The receptionist stopped looking up years ago. He signed a visitor log, took the elevator to the 3rd floor, turned left past the nurse's station. Room 312. The door was always slightly open. Kenneth pushed it wider and stepped inside. Virginia Holloway lay in the bed closest to the window. Tubes ran from her arm to an 4-stand. A monitor beeped steadily beside her. Her eyes were closed. Her chest rose and fell with mechanical precision. The ventilator had been removed 3 years ago when she started breathing on her own, but everything else remained. "Hey," Kenneth said quietly. He pulled the visitor chair closer to the bed. The vinyl cushion had a permanent dent from where he sat every night. He lowered himself into it and looked at her face. She looked peaceful. That's what everyone said. Peaceful, like she was sleeping. Kenneth knew better. Sleep implied rest. Sleep implied the possibility of waking. This was something else entirely. "Slow day at work," he said. "Peterson called in sick again. 3rd time this month. I think he's job hunting." Virginia didn't respond. She never did. Kenneth kept talking anyway. "The maple tree finally gave out. The one in the backyard. You remember. We planted it the year we bought the house. Storm last week took out the whole top half. I'll need to get someone to cut it down before it falls on the fence." He paused, listened to the beep of the monitor, watched the rise and fall of her chest. "Your mom called again. Left a message. Didn't call back." That was a lie. Virginia's mother hadn't called in over a year. But Kenneth talked to fill the silence, and sometimes the truth felt too heavy to carry into this room. He stayed for an hour, sometimes longer. He told her about bills and broken appliances and which neighbors had moved away. He told her about the weather, about the news, about nothing that mattered. He never told her that he was tired. He never told her that the house felt like a tomb. He never told her that sometimes, driving home alone in the dark, he forgot what her voice sounded like. At 8 o'clock, he stood, adjusted the blanket over her legs, made sure the call button was within reach of the nurses, even though she would never press it. "See you tomorrow," he said. Then he walked out, took the elevator down, signed out at the front desk, drove home to the empty house where he brushed his teeth, set the alarm, and lay in bed staring at the ceiling until exhaustion finally pulled him under. The next morning, the alarm went off at 5:30, and Kenneth did it all again. People in town called him devoted. They said it at the grocery store, at the gas station, at the water plant during the rare moments when someone tried to make conversation. That Kenneth Holloway, they'd say, still visiting his wife every single night. 6 years now. Most men would have moved on. Kenneth never corrected them. Devotion implied choice. Devotion implied love that endured. What Kenneth felt was something closer to obligation. A promise made in a church 15 years ago that he didn't know how to break. A marriage that had died long before the accident, but was kept alive by machines and insurance payments and the fact that walking away felt like murder. So he stayed. He sold his truck to cover the first year of care. A 2003 Silverado he'd bought used and babied for a decade. It hurt to watch the buyer drive it away, but the money kept Virginia in her private room for another few months. He paused his retirement contributions, stopped eating out, stopped buying new clothes. His wardrobe shrank to 5 work shirts and 3 pairs of jeans that he rotated through the week. He gave up fishing. That one hurt more than the truck. Fishing had been his escape. Saturday mornings on the Cedar River with a thermos of coffee and a tackle box his father had given him. No phone, no people, just the sound of water and the pull of the line. But the hospital bills didn't stop. The care didn't get cheaper. So Kenneth sold his fishing gear to a kid on Craigslist for $200 and used the money to pay down the balance he owed the medical supply company. He didn't fish anymore. He didn't do much of anything anymore. Virginia's mother stopped visiting after the second year. Her name was Diane. She'd flown in from Phoenix the day after the accident, crying and demanding answers that no one could give. She stayed for 2 weeks, came to the hospital every day, held Virginia's hand, talked to doctors, prayed loudly in the waiting room. Then she went home. She came back for Christmas that year, stayed 4 days, spent most of the time crying in Kenneth's guest room and asking why God would do this to her daughter. The next Christmas, she called instead of visiting. By the 3rd year, the calls became sporadic. Then they stopped altogether. Kenneth didn't blame her. Grief had a shelf life. People moved on because they had to. Virginia's friends faded faster. The first few months, they'd rotated through, brought flowers, sat with Kenneth in the cafeteria, promised they'd keep visiting. But watching someone lie unresponsive in a hospital bed was hard. It was uncomfortable. It made people confront their own mortality in ways they didn't enjoy. One by one, they stopped coming. Eventually, Kenneth was the only one left. He talked to her anyway, not because he thought she could hear him. The doctors had been clear about that. Brain activity was minimal. Responses were non-existent. She wasn't in a coma. She wasn't locked in. She was simply gone in every way that mattered, even though her body remained. Kenneth talked because the silence in that room felt like drowning. "They're tearing down the old Walgreens on Main," he said one evening in late February. "Putting up condos. Expensive ones. Not that it matters to us." He adjusted his chair. The vinyl squeaked under his weight. "I fixed the bathroom sink. Leak's been driving me crazy for a month." Turned out to be the washer. 30-cent part. Took me 10 minutes. Virginia's face didn't change. It never did. Kenneth looked at her hands resting on top of the blanket. Her fingers were long and delicate. She used to paint her nails. Bright colors. Red. Purple. Once, a terrible shade of green that she'd laughed about for weeks. Her nails were bare now. Clipped short. Clean. Hospital policy. "I'm thinking about selling the house," Kenneth said quietly. It was the first time he'd said it out loud. The thought had been growing in the back of his mind for months, pushing against the walls he'd built to keep it contained. It's too big for one person. Too many memories. Too expensive to keep up. He paused, waited, as if she might suddenly open her eyes and tell him not to, tell him to wait, tell him she was coming home. The monitor beeped. Virginia's chest rose and fell. Kenneth stood, smoothed the blanket one more time, said goodnight to a woman who couldn't hear him, and went home to a house that felt like a mausoleum. On a Thursday night in early March, Kenneth noticed something wrong. He'd signed in at the front desk, taken the elevator, walked the familiar path to room 312, pushed open the door. Virginia was in her usual position, head slightly elevated, arms at her sides, eyes closed. But something was different. Kenneth pulled the chair closer and sat down. He looked at her face, her hair, her hands. Then he saw it, her fingernails. They were trimmed neatly, filed smooth at the edges. And they were painted, a soft pale pink that caught the light from the window. Kenneth stared. Hospital policy didn't allow nail polish. He knew that. He'd asked about it years ago, back when he still thought about the small things that might make her comfortable. The nurse had explained that polish interfered with oxygen monitoring, something about the sensors on the fingertips. It was a safety issue. He'd accepted it and moved on. So why were her nails painted now? Kenneth leaned closer. The polish was fresh, No chips. No smudges. Applied carefully, evenly. Someone had taken their time. He sat back in the chair. His mind moved slowly through possibilities. Maybe the rules had changed. Maybe they allowed it now. But that didn't make sense. This was the same hospital, the same staff, the same routines that had governed Virginia's care for 6 years. Maybe a nurse had done it as a kindness. But the nurses barely had time to keep up with their regular duties. They didn't have time for manicures. Kenneth stood, walked to the door, looked down the hallway. A nurse he recognized was updating a chart at the station. "Excuse me," Kenneth said. The nurse looked up. Her name tag read Linda. She was in her 50s, heavy-set, always efficient. "Yes, Mr. Holloway. My wife's nails. They're painted." Linda frowned slightly, walked over, looked into the room. "Oh," she said. "That's nice. Who did it?" Linda shrugged. "Families do that sometimes. It's sweet." "I'm her family," Kenneth said. "I didn't do it." Linda's frown deepened. "Well, maybe her mother visited? Or a friend?" "Her mother lives in Arizona. She hasn't been here in 3 years." Linda looked uncomfortable now. "I don't know, Mr. Holloway. Maybe one of the other nurses? I can ask around if you'd like." Kenneth shook his head slowly. "No, it's fine. Thank you." Linda nodded and returned to her station. Kenneth went back into the room, sat down, looked at Virginia's hands. Pale pink. Someone had painted his wife's nails. And it wasn't him. Kenneth didn't explode. He didn't make accusations. He didn't demand investigations or explanations. He watched. Over the next 2 weeks, he paid attention in ways he hadn't before. He looked at Virginia not as the woman he visited out of obligation, but as a puzzle with pieces that didn't fit. Her hair, for example. It was clean, too clean, washed regularly, brushed smooth, the kind of maintenance that required effort and consistency. Kenneth had assumed the nurses did it. Basic hygiene, part of the care package. But now he thought about the other patients he'd seen in long-term care over the years. The ones in shared rooms. The ones whose families had stopped visiting. Their hair was clean enough, but it wasn't styled. It wasn't maintained with the kind of attention Virginia's was. He started noticing other things. Her skin tone was healthy. Not pale or sallow like someone who'd been bedridden for years. There was color in her cheeks. A warmth that didn't make sense for someone who supposedly never moved. Her muscles hadn't wasted the way the doctors had warned him they would. In the early days, they'd talked about atrophy, about the way prolonged immobility destroyed muscle tissue. They'd mentioned physical therapy, range of motion exercises that the staff would perform to slow the deterioration. Kenneth had signed the consent forms and assumed it was being done. But looking at Virginia now, really looking, her arms didn't look atrophied. Her legs beneath the blanket had shape, substance, like someone who moved. Kenneth said nothing. He came every evening at 6:45. He sat in the vinyl chair. He talked about his day, about the weather, about nothing. And he watched. 3 weeks after noticing the nail polish, Kenneth saw it happen. A food cart rattled past the open door. Kenneth was mid-sentence, talking about a broken water main on Jefferson Street. The cart hit a bump. A metal tray clattered to the floor with a sharp crash. Virginia's hand twitched. Not a muscle spasm, not a reflex. A flinch, quick and controlled. The kind of movement someone makes when startled by sudden noise. Kenneth stopped talking. He looked at her hand. It was still now, resting on the blanket, exactly where it had been. But he had seen it. He waited, watched her face, watched for any other sign of movement. Nothing. The monitor beeped its steady rhythm. Her chest rose and fell. Her eyes stayed closed. Kenneth stood slowly, walked to the door, looked out into the hallway. The food cart was already gone. A nurse down the hall was checking a chart. No one had noticed. He went back to the chair, sat down. His heart was beating faster now. Not from fear. Not yet. From clarity. Kenneth spent the weekend thinking. He didn't tell anyone what he'd seen. Didn't call a doctor. Didn't report it to the nurses. He thought about the nail polish, the healthy skin tone, the maintained hair, the hand that twitched at sudden noise. He thought about 6 years of payments, of sacrifice, of visiting a woman who was supposed to be unresponsive. He thought about patterns. Patterns didn't lie. By Monday morning, Kenneth had made a decision. He called his supervisor at the water plant, Told him he needed a few days off. Personal matter. The supervisor surprised Kenneth was asking for time off at all after 6 years of perfect attendance. Approved it immediately. Then Kenneth prepared. On Tuesday evening, Kenneth followed his usual routine. He drove to the hospital, signed in, took the elevator to the 3rd floor, visited Virginia in room 312. He stayed for an hour, talked about work even though he hadn't been there, told her about a training seminar in Des Moines he'd be attending for the next few days. It's mandatory, he said. Water safety certification. I'll be gone Wednesday through Friday. Won't be able to visit. Virginia's face didn't change. Kenneth stood, kissed her forehead like he always did. Smooth and cool. No reaction. See you next week, he said. He left the room, signed out at the front desk, drove home. Then he packed a bag, toiletries, a change of clothes, snacks, a thermos of coffee. He grabbed the old digital camera he used to take on fishing trips, checked the battery, cleared the memory card. At 11:30 that night, Kenneth drove back to St. Vincent Regional Hospital. He didn't park in his usual spot. Instead, he pulled into the lot across the street, a shopping center that closed at 9. The lot was empty except for a few employee vehicles near the back. Kenneth parked facing the hospital. He had a clear view of the main entrance and the staff entrance on the east side. He turned off the engine, poured coffee into the thermos cap, and waited. Midnight passed, then 1 in the morning. Kenneth watched the hospital windows, watched the occasional nurse or doctor walk to their car, watched the night shift change at 2. At 2:45, the staff entrance door opened. A woman stepped out. She was wearing jeans and sneakers, a dark hooded sweatshirt. Her hood was pulled up, but even from across the street, Kenneth could see her face clearly under the parking lot lights. It was Virginia, his wife, who was supposed to be unresponsive in room 312, who hadn't walked or talked or opened her eyes in 6 years. She moved easily, casually, no limp, no hesitation. She pulled her hood lower and walked toward the far end of the parking lot. Kenneth's hands were shaking. He raised the camera, pointed it through the windshield, pressed record. Virginia stopped beside a dark blue Ford Explorer. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. He was tall, mid-40s, wearing a jacket and jeans. He smiled when he saw Virginia. She walked straight to him. He pulled her into a hug, kissed the top of her head. They stood there for a moment, comfortable, familiar. Then they got into the Explorer, the man behind the wheel, Virginia in the passenger seat. The vehicle pulled out of the lot and turned on a college street. Kenneth lowered the camera. He sat in the dark, coffee forgotten, hands still shaking. He didn't follow them. He didn't need to. He already understood. Kenneth didn't go home that night. He drove to a 24-hour diner on the edge of town, ordered coffee he didn't drink, sat in a corner booth, and stared at the camera in his hands. The footage was clear. Virginia walking, moving, getting into a car with a man who wasn't her husband. He could take it to the hospital, show the administration, prove she'd been faking for 6 years. He could call the police, report fraud, insurance fraud, medical fraud. He could confront her, walk into room 312, and ask her to explain. But Kenneth didn't do any of those things. Not yet, because understanding what had happened wasn't enough. He needed to understand why, and he needed to know who the man was. Kenneth went home at sunrise, showered, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table with his laptop. He opened the camera and reviewed the footage frame by frame. He zoomed in on the man's face, took screenshots, saved them. Then he started searching. He began with the hospital, pulled up their website, clicked through staff directories, volunteer programs, donor lists. Nothing matched. He tried Facebook, searched for St. Vincent Regional Hospital, scrolled through hundreds of tag photos, events, fundraisers, staff gatherings. At 3 in the afternoon, he found it. A photo from 4 years ago. Hospital Volunteer Appreciation Dinner. A group shot of people in formal were holding wine glasses. Third from the left, the man from the parking lot. The caption listed names. Kenneth read through them until he found the match. Kyle Mercer, former volunteer coordinator. Kenneth clicked on the name. It led to a Facebook profile. Privacy settings were tight, but the profile picture was public. Same man. No question. Kenneth leaned back in his chair. Kyle Mercer, volunteer coordinator. He would have had access to patient records, to schedules, to rooms. He would have known Virginia. Kenneth opened a new tab. Search Kyle Mercer, Cedar Falls, Iowa. The results were sparse. A LinkedIn profile that hadn't been updated in 3 years. A mention in a hospital newsletter from 5 years ago about the volunteer program's expansion. Then Kenneth found something else. A property record. Kyle Mercer, current resident of 847 Orchard Lane, Cedar Falls. Kenneth wrote down the address. He sat there for a long time, thinking. Then he grabbed his keys and drove to Orchard Lane. 847 was a small ranch house on a quiet street. Older neighborhood, mature trees. The kind of place where people kept to themselves. Kenneth parked 2 houses down. Watched. The blue Ford Explorer was in the driveway. Lights were off inside the house. Curtains drawn. Kenneth waited. At 6 in the evening, Kyle Mercer walked out the front door. He was carrying a grocery bag. He got into the Explorer and drove away. Kenneth waited 10 more minutes. Then he drove home. He didn't need to see more. He already knew enough. Over the next 2 weeks, Kenneth uncovered the rest. He didn't hire a private investigator. He didn't break any laws. He simply paid attention. He watched Kyle's house, followed his patterns. Kyle worked from home most days, left occasionally for errands, went to the gym 3 times a week. And every Tuesday and Friday night, Kyle drove to the hospital at 2:30 in the morning. Virginia's schedule. Kenneth checked hospital records he still had access to as her primary contact. He requested copies of her care logs, reviewed visitation records. The logs showed standard care, feeding, medication, hygiene, nothing unusual. But the visitation records only showed Kenneth. Because Virginia wasn't a visitor, she was a patient who left whenever she wanted. Kenneth started piecing together the timeline. The accident had happened 6 years ago. Single-car collision on Highway 20. No witnesses. No alcohol. No phone found at the scene. Virginia had been declared unresponsive at the hospital. Doctors couldn't explain it. Brain scans showed minimal activity. She met all the criteria for a vegetative state. Kenneth had signed the forms, agreed to long-term care, started paying. But now he wondered, what if the accident had been real, but the coma hadn't? What if Virginia had seen an opportunity and taken it? Kenneth pulled up Virginia's old emails. He still had access to the shared account they'd used for bills and household matters. He searched for Kyle Mercer, found 3 emails, all from 7 years ago, before the accident. The messages were casual, friendly, thanking Kyle for helping coordinate a charity event Virginia had worked on, making plans for coffee, asking about his weekend. Nothing overtly romantic, but the tone was warm, familiar. Kenneth kept digging. He found more. Text message records from their old phone plan. Before Virginia had switched to her own account 3 months before the accident. Hundreds of messages between Virginia and Kyle, starting 8 years ago, increasing in frequency. The content was mundane at first, work-related, then personal, then intimate. By the time of the accident, they were texting multiple times a day. Kenneth sat back, stared at the screen. She'd been planning to leave him. The accident had just given her a different way out. No divorce, no arguments, no splitting assets or explaining to friends and family why the marriage had failed. She could just disappear into a hospital bed and let Kenneth handle everything, while she lived another life. The full picture came together slowly. Virginia had been involved with Kyle for at least 2 years before the accident, deep enough to plan an exit strategy. The coma gave her everything she wanted without the mess of actually leaving. Kenneth worked overtime to pay for her care, sold his truck, stopped living his own life, while Virginia spent her nights with Kyle, slept in his house, lived freely, and during the day, she returned to the hospital, climbed back into bed, closed her eyes, let the nurses check her vitals and update her charts. A perfect system. No one questioned a patient in long-term care. No one looked too closely. The staff was overworked and underpaid. As long as Virginia appeared stable, they had no reason to suspect anything. And Kenneth had been too devoted to notice. That was the word everyone used. Devoted. He'd been a fool. For 6 years, he'd mourned a woman who wasn't dead, paid for care she didn't need, sacrificed everything while she moved on. She'd replaced him, and she'd done it without ever having to face him. Kenneth sat alone in the dark kitchen. The same kitchen where he'd eaten dinner alone for 6 years. The same table where Virginia's chair had stayed empty. He didn't cry. He didn't rage. He felt something colder. Clarity. And a decision forming in the quiet. Kenneth didn't confront Virginia. He didn't walk into room 312 and demand answers. Didn't threaten Kyle Mercer. Didn't call the police or the hospital administration. He simply stopped paying. It wasn't dramatic. No angry phone calls. No canceled checks thrown in anyone's face. Kenneth just quietly began making changes. First, he called the insurance company. Spoke to a representative named Teresa who sounded tired and overworked. "I'd like to request a review of my wife's case," Kenneth said calmly. "I've noticed some improvements recently. Small things. Muscle tone. Responses to stimuli. I think it might be worth having her reassessed." Teresa put him on hold. Came back 5 minutes later. "We can schedule an evaluation," she said. "It's standard procedure when there's potential for improvement. I'll have someone from our medical review team contact the hospital." "Thank you," Kenneth said. He hung up. Then he called the hospital billing department. Spoke to a man named Derek who managed long-term care accounts. "I need to update my payment plan," Kenneth said. "I've been covering non-essential services out of pocket. I like to scale back to just the basics." "What insurance covers?" Derek pulled up the account. "Let me see. You've been paying for the private room. Enhanced hygiene services. Physical therapy. We can move her to a shared room and reduce the additional services. That would cut your monthly cost significantly." "Let's do that," Kenneth said. "Are you sure?" Derek asked. "She's been in that room for 6 years. It might be disruptive to move her." "I'm sure," Kenneth said. Derek processed the changes. "Okay, this will take effect at the start of next month. You'll see the reduced billing then." Kenneth thanked him and hung up. Next, he called the financial advisor who managed what little remained of their joint savings. Asked about liquidating the account Virginia's care had been drawing from. "I want to close it," Kenneth said. "Transfer what's left into my personal account." The advisor hesitated. "That account is designated for medical expenses. If you close it, you'll lose the tax advantages." "I understand," Kenneth said. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," Kenneth said. "I just need to make some changes." The advisor processed the request. Kenneth also stopped the automatic payments he'd been making to cover gaps insurance didn't pay. Stopped paying for the upgraded meal plan, the extended visiting hours, the small comforts he'd been buying to ease his guilt. He stepped back, and he let the system do what systems do when the money stops flowing. 3 weeks later, Virginia woke up. Kenneth got the call at work. A nurse named Linda, the same one he'd asked about the nail polish. "Mr. Holloway," she said. Her voice was shaking with excitement. "Your wife is awake. She's responsive. She's asking for you." Kenneth was standing at a pressure gauge. He looked at the dial, watched the needle hold steady. "When did this happen?" he asked. "About an hour ago." She opened her eyes, started speaking. "The doctors are with her now. It's incredible. After all these years." Kenneth was quiet. "Mr. Holloway? Are you there?" "I'm here," he said. "Can you come to the hospital?" "I'll be there soon," Kenneth said. He hung up, finished his shift, clocked out at 4, drove home, changed his shirt, made a sandwich, ate it slowly. Then he drove to the hospital. Room 312 was crowded. 2 doctors Kenneth had never seen before. 3 nurses. Equipment that hadn't been there yesterday. Virginia was sitting up in bed. Her eyes were open, alert. She looked thinner than he remembered. Older, but very much awake. She saw Kenneth in the doorway. Her face crumpled. "Kenneth," she said. Her voice was hoarse, weak, like someone who hadn't used it in years. One of the doctors turned. "Mr. Holloway, I'm Dr. Patel. This is remarkable, truly remarkable. We're running tests, but your wife appears to be fully responsive. Motor function is good. Cognitive function seems intact. We'll know more in the coming days, but this is beyond anything we expected." Kenneth nodded, said nothing. Dr. Patel seemed to expect more emotion. When none came, he cleared his throat. "We'll give you 2 some privacy. Virginia needs rest, but I'm sure you have a lot to talk about." The medical staff filed out. The door clicked shut. Kenneth stood at the foot of the bed. Virginia was crying now, tears running down her face. I'm so sorry, she said. Kenneth, I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. I don't know where I've been. It's all so confusing. But I'm back. I'm here. Thank God I'm here. Kenneth pulled the visitor chair closer. Sat down. You're awake, he said flatly. I don't remember anything, Virginia said quickly, the words tumbling out. The last thing I remember is driving. Then nothing. Just darkness. And now I'm here. 6 years. They told me it's been 6 years. I can't believe it. I can't believe you waited. She reached for his hand. Kenneth didn't pull away, but he didn't take her hand either. Virginia noticed. Her tears slowed. Kenneth, the doctors are asking questions, Kenneth said. About the timeline. About your condition. Insurance is involved now. They want to understand how someone in a vegetative state for 6 years suddenly recovers. Virginia's face went pale. What do you mean? They're reviewing your medical records, looking at the care you received, trying to figure out if something was missed, or if something else was going on. I don't understand, Virginia said. But her voice was different now, less certain. Kenneth looked at her, really looked. You will. Virginia asked for Kenneth again the next morning. He didn't come. The nurses called, left messages, said Virginia was asking for him, needed him, was confused and scared. Kenneth deleted the voicemails. On the third day, he went back to the hospital. Virginia was alone in her room. The medical staff had moved her to a shared room on the second floor, the downgrade from her private space. She was in the bed by the window. An elderly woman in the other bed was asleep, snoring softly. Virginia looked up when Kenneth walked in. Relief flooded her face. You came, she said. Kenneth sat down. We need to talk. I know, Virginia said quickly. I know you must have so many questions. I have questions too. The doctors keep asking me things I can't answer. About where I've been. What I remember. Kenneth, I'm scared. I don't know what's happening. You were never in a coma, Kenneth said. The room went silent. Virginia stared at him. What? You were never unresponsive. You faked it. For 6 years. That's insane, Virginia said. But her voice was shaking. I saw you, Kenneth said calmly. 3 weeks ago. I watched you walk out of the hospital at 3 in the morning. I watched you get into a car with Kyle Mercer. I have it on video. Virginia's face drained of color. Kenneth, I know about the emails, the text messages. I know you were planning to leave before the accident. I know you saw an opportunity and took it. Please, Virginia whispered. Let me explain. I'm not interested in explanations, Kenneth said. I'm here to tell you what happens next. Virginia was crying again now. But these tears were different. Desperate. The insurance company is investigating, Kenneth said. They've already started reviewing your records. They're looking at the care you received, the money that was paid. When they find out you were faking, they'll want it all back. Every penny, plus fraud charges. I'll tell them it was a mistake, Virginia said quickly. I'll tell them I was confused, that I lost time, that I didn't know what I was doing. That won't work, Kenneth said, because the hospital has security footage. And when they review it, they'll see you leaving, coming back, over and over, for years. Virginia's hands were shaking. What do you want from me? Nothing, Kenneth said. Then why are you telling me this? Because you left me 6 years ago, Kenneth said evenly. You let me work myself into the ground. You let me sell everything I owned. You watched me give up my life while you lived yours. And now it's my turn. Virginia was sobbing. Please, Kenneth. Please. I made a mistake. I know I did. But I never meant for it to go this far. I thought I'd just do it for a few months. Just until I figured things out. But then it became easier to stay. And I was trapped. I didn't know how to come back. You weren't trapped, Kenneth said. You were comfortable. I'll make it right, Virginia begged. I'll tell them it was my fault. I'll take responsibility. Just please don't leave me like this. Kenneth stood. The house is sold, he said. The accounts are closed. I filed for divorce 2 weeks ago. You'll be served once you're discharged. You can't do this, Virginia said. I already did. Where am I supposed to go? I have nothing. No job. No money. No one. You have Kyle, Kenneth said. Virginia's face twisted. Kyle's gone. He stopped answering my calls the day I woke up. Kenneth wasn't surprised. Men like Kyle Mercer didn't stick around when things got complicated. Then you'll figure it out, Kenneth said. Like I did. He walked to the door. Kenneth, Virginia's voice broke. Please. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Kenneth stopped. Turn back. I know you are, he said quietly, but sorry doesn't give me back 6 years. He left. Virginia's sobs followed him down the hallway. But Kenneth didn't stop, didn't look back. He'd already given her too much of his life. He wasn't giving her another second. The investigation moved slowly but thoroughly. Insurance fraud investigators interviewed hospital staff, reviewed security footage, pulled medical records. They found exactly what Kenneth knew they'd find. Virginia Holloway had been leaving the hospital regularly for years. The footage showed her walking out, walking back in, always during night shifts when staffing was minimal. The nursing staff who'd been on duty during those times were questioned. Most claimed they had no idea. A few admitted they'd seen her moving occasionally, but assumed it was improvement, that she was getting better. No one wanted to admit they'd been negligent. The hospital administration tried to contain the scandal, issued statements about reviewing their protocols, placed certain staff members on administrative leave. But the damage was done. Virginia was charged with insurance fraud, medical fraud, filing false claims. The charges weren't dramatic. No handcuffs, no perp walk, just paperwork and court dates and lawyers who billed by the hour. Her court-appointed attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, argued that Virginia had been suffering from a mental health crisis, that she hadn't understood the consequences of her actions. The prosecutor wasn't interested. The case was too clean, the evidence too clear. Virginia had deliberately defrauded the healthcare system for 6 years. She'd cost the insurance company hundreds of thousands of dollars. She'd wasted hospital resources. She pleaded guilty to avoid trial. The judge sentenced her to probation, community service, restitution payments that would take the rest of her life to pay off. No prison time, but the consequences didn't need prison to be devastating. Virginia's reputation collapsed quietly. Her name appeared in the local news. Not front page, just a small article on page 5. But in a town like Cedar Falls, page 5 was enough. People talked, whispered in grocery store aisles, shared the article on Facebook with shocked emoji reactions. Virginia Holloway, the woman everyone had felt sorry for, the woman whose husband had been so devoted. She'd been faking it all along. The story spread. Friends who'd visited in those early months felt betrayed, angry. They grieved for her, prayed for her, and she'd been lying in a hospital bed fully aware while they cried beside her. Virginia's mother flew in from Phoenix for the court hearing, sat in the back row, didn't speak to her daughter afterward. When Virginia tried to call her a week later, Diane didn't answer, didn't call back. Virginia was alone. Kyle Mercer had disappeared completely, changed his number, deactivated his social media. A neighbor on Orchard Lane mentioned he'd moved out of state. Colorado, maybe, or Montana. Gone either way. Virginia tried to find work. Applied to retail jobs, administrative positions, anything. But background checks revealed the fraud conviction. Employers moved on to other candidates. She eventually found a job stocking shelves at a discount grocery store on the edge of town. Night shift, minimum wage. She moved into a shared apartment near the bus line. 2 roommates she barely knew. A single bedroom with peeling wallpaper and a window that didn't close all the way. She rode the bus to work, spent her shifts in silence, came home to an empty room. At 43 years old, Virginia started over with nothing. No savings, no marriage, no reputation, no one waiting beside her bed. Kenneth didn't watch her fall. He didn't need to. He'd already moved on. Kenneth moved to a smaller town near Decorah. The house in Cedar Falls sold quickly. Too many memories, but good bones. A young couple bought it, told Kenneth they loved the big backyard, planned to put in a garden. Kenneth didn't mention the maple tree. They'd figure out. He took the money from the sale and bought a small cabin outside Decorah. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a porch that overlooked the upper Iowa River. It needed work. The roof leaked. The plumbing rattled. The kitchen was decades out of date. Kenneth didn't mind. He spent his first month there fixing things. Replaced the roof shingles himself. Replumbed the bathroom. Sanded and refinished the kitchen cabinets. He worked slowly. No rush. No one waiting for him at a hospital. No bills piling up that he couldn't afford. Just the sound of the river and the work of his own hands. He got a job at a smaller water treatment facility in Decorah. The pay was less than Cedar Falls, but he didn't need much anymore. He lived simply, kept his expenses low, saved what he could. On weekends, he fished. He bought new gear. Nothing fancy, a basic rod and tackle box from the sporting goods store in town. But it was his, and it was enough. He'd drive to a quiet spot on the river, set up his chair, cast his line. Sometimes he caught something, sometimes he didn't. It didn't matter. The silence on the river was different from the silence in that hospital room. It didn't accuse. It didn't demand. It just existed, and Kenneth could exist inside it without feeling like he was drowning. He made a few acquaintances in town. The guy who ran the hardware store. A waitress at the diner who remembered his coffee order. He didn't make friends. Not real ones. But he didn't feel lonely either. Lonely was what he'd felt for 6 years, sitting beside a woman who wasn't really there. This was different. This was peace. On a Saturday morning in late September, Kenneth was on the river when his phone rang. He almost didn't answer, but the number was local. Decorah, area code. He picked up. Mr. Holloway? A woman's voice. Professional. Polite. Yes. This is Angela from Decorah Community Church. I hope I'm not bothering you. Your name came up as someone who might be interested in volunteering for our weekend meal program. We serve breakfast to folks in need every Saturday morning. We're always looking for help. Kenneth watched his fishing line drift in the current. I'm not much of a church person, he said. That's okay, Angela said kindly. We're not looking for members, just people willing to show up and help. No pressure, no commitment, just if you're interested. Kenneth was quiet for a moment. What time, he asked. 7 to 10. We're at 412 Maple Street. I'll think about it, Kenneth said. That's all we ask, Angela said. Have a good day, Mr. Holloway. She hung up. Kenneth reeled in his line, packed up his gear, drove back to the cabin. That night, he thought about it. He thought about 6 years of visiting a woman who wasn't there. 6 years of obligation without purpose. He thought about Angela's offer. No pressure, no commitment, just showing up and helping. On Saturday morning, Kenneth drove to 412 Maple Street. The church was small, older building with white siding and a simple cross above the door. Angela met him outside. She was in her 60s. Kind eyes, worn hands that had done real work. Mr. Holloway, she said. You came. Kenneth, he said. Just Kenneth. Kenneth then. Come on, I'll show you around. The meal program was organized, but chaotic. Volunteers setting up tables. Cooking scrambled eggs and pancakes in the church kitchen. Pouring coffee. People started arriving at 7:15. Families. Single men and women. Some looked homeless. Some just looked tired. Kenneth helped serve food. Poured coffee. Cleared tables. No one asked about his past. No one called him devoted. No one expected anything except the work in front of him. At 10 o'clock, they cleaned up. Angela thanked everyone. Asked if Kenneth would come back next week. I'll be here, Kenneth said. And he was. Kenneth never saw Virginia again. He heard updates occasionally. Small-town gossip filtered through even to Decorah. She was working at the grocery store. Still living in the shared apartment. Still paying off the restitution. She tried to reach out once. An email sent to the address they'd shared during the marriage. Kenneth saw it in his inbox. Subject, please read this. He deleted it without opening it. He didn't hate her. Hate required energy he didn't have to spare. He simply didn't think about her anymore. She'd made her choices. She'd lived with the consequences. And Kenneth had made his. Virginia learned slowly what it meant to lose everything. She learned that trust, once broken, was nearly impossible to rebuild. That reputation mattered in ways she'd never considered. That starting over at 43 with nothing was harder than anything she'd imagined. She worked her night shifts, stocked shelves, avoided eye contact with former friends who sometimes shopped there. She rode the bus home in the dark, sat in her small room, thought about the 6 years she'd spent pretending to be helpless while Kenneth carried the weight of her choices. She thought about what she'd lost. Not just Kenneth, not just the house or the savings or the life she'd had. She'd lost herself. The woman who'd thought faking a coma was a solution to her problems. Who convinced herself she was trapped when really she'd just been comfortable. She'd lost 6 years of her own life hiding from decisions she should have made. And she destroyed the one person who'd stayed. Some nights, she wanted to call Kenneth. to apologize again, to explain, to ask if there was any way to make things right. But she knew the answer. Some bridges once burned stayed burned. Kenneth's life in Decorah was quiet. He worked. He fished. He volunteered at the church. He ate dinner alone most nights. But the silence didn't accuse him anymore. He'd learned something important in those 6 years beside Virginia's hospital bed. Some people abandon you long before they leave. They're still there physically, still taking up space, still requiring your time and energy and sacrifice. But they're already gone in every way that matters. And the kindest thing you can do for yourself is let them go. Kenneth had finally learned to let go. Not with anger, not with bitterness, just with the quiet understanding that he'd given enough, and that the rest of his life was his own. On a cool October evening, Kenneth sat on his porch watching the river. The sun was setting, turning the water gold and orange. The air smelled like wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney downstream. He had a beer in one hand, an old paperback in the other. His phone was inside, turned off. No one was waiting for him at a hospital. No one was depending on him to show up. No one was asking him to sacrifice more than he could afford to give. For the first time in 6 years, Kenneth Holloway was free. He took a sip of his beer, opened his book, let the sound of the river fill the silence. And he realized something that made him smile. The truest revenge wasn't destruction. It wasn't watching someone fall. It was surviving long enough to stop carrying them. Kenneth had survived, and Virginia would carry herself from now on. He turned the page and kept reading as the sun disappeared behind the trees.